I had always loved my orchard rows of apple trees, pear trees, and cherries, each planted with care and patience over years of sweat, sunburns, and long summer days. It was my sanctuary, a personal paradise where the seasons marked progress, growth, and life itself. But one morning, I stepped outside and froze. My orchard was gone. Not physically gone, but submerged under a massive puddle, a waterlogged swamp that hadn't existed the night before. At first, I thought it was a freak storm, some random overflow from the irrigation system. But then I saw it, a heavy trench dug along the edge of my property, redirecting runoff straight from Karen's lavish hillside estate above mine. A massive drainage pond had formed, funneling water from her manicured lawns directly into my orchard. My trees, my soil, my years of hard work, drowning under what could only be called a man-made flood. And there she was. Karen, in her luxury designer sunglasses, standing on the edge of her property with that infuriating smirk. Arms crossed, heels dug into the manicured grass, the picture of entitlement. "It's HOA approved," she said casually, as though she'd done me a favor instead of destroying my livelihood. "You should thank me for improving the land." I could feel my blood boil, but I forced myself to take a deep breath. Because this wasn't just water. It wasn't just property damage. It was a challenge, a provocation, a declaration that she could bulldoze her way through boundaries, rules, and decency, and no one could stop her. And right then, I made a decision: I wouldn't yell, I wouldn't beg, I wouldn't watch my orchard rot. I would fight with every ounce of strategy, patience, and creativity I had. I began documenting everything: the drainage trench, the water levels, the trees submerged in mud. I mapped the flow, measured distances, noted property lines, and photographed every inch of devastation. I contacted engineers, city officials, and environmental experts, gathering evidence that was undeniable. Karen may have had wealth, power, and HOA status, but I had precision, documentation, and a plan. And I was ready. Ready to turn her own sense of untouchable entitlement into the nightmare she had unleashed on my orchard. Because when someone destroys your life for ego, patience isn't enough. You need strategy. You need persistence. And sometimes, you need revenge. The next morning, I walked through my orchard, wading ankle-deep in mud, my favorite trees leaning under the weight of water. Karen's drainage pond had transformed the entire property into a swamp. It wasn't just a nuisance, it was devastation. Every blossom that had promised fruit for the season was now bruised, drowned, or uprooted. The smell of wet soil and rotting vegetation filled the air. I could almost hear the orchard screaming in protest. I knew immediate confrontation would get me nowhere. Karen thrived on theatrics and intimidation. Her wealth insulated her from the consequences most people would fear. So I did what she didn't expect: I stayed calm. I documented every detail. Photographs, video footage, precise measurements, and timestamps. Every muddy step I took was a note in my growing dossier of evidence. Each tree, each water line, each channel dug into my property told a story, one I intended to use strategically. While cataloging the destruction, I researched municipal codes, HOA policies, and water runoff regulations. Karen's pond wasn't just cruel, it was illegal. Redirecting storm water onto someone else's property violated multiple ordinances. I began calling environmental engineers, soil specialists, and city inspectors, explaining the situation in detail. Everyone I spoke to understood the severity. Karen's pond wasn't a minor inconvenience, it was property destruction and environmental sabotage. Her arrogance fueled my plan. She believed her money and HOA position made her untouchable. But she had overlooked one critical element: I wasn't reactive. I was calculated. I started envisioning the consequences in reverse, thinking about every action that would force accountability. Every engineering report, every official warning, every photo became a weapon in a battle she couldn't fight with charm or influence. Neighbors began noticing the flood in my orchard. Whispers traveled, and some came by to witness the damage. Karen tried to smile politely, brushing it off as necessary landscaping improvements, but the cracks in her confident exterior were beginning to show. The HOA meetings, once her stage, now had her tiptoeing, aware that my evidence could challenge her narrative at any moment. By evening, the sun reflected off the stagnant water, and I stood in my ruined orchard, surveying the damage with a grim resolve. This wasn't just about reclaiming my trees or my land, it was about sending a clear message: destruction born from arrogance always has consequences. And when the storm I planned hit, Karen's luxury home would finally feel the weight of the nightmare she had created. City inspectors arrived 2 days later, not because Karen reported anything, but because the environmental engineer I hired filed an emergency hazard review. Karen stood on her pristine stone patio, arms crossed, designer sunglasses masking the panic in her eyes as they examined the runoff trench feeding her illegal pond. She tried to spin the story, claiming it was a harmless water feature, but the inspectors saw what I had documented: redirected stormwater channels, altered drainage paths, and clear evidence of deliberate excavation onto my land. They walked my orchard, taking notes, snapping photos, measuring saturation levels in the drowning soil. Karen's confidence cracked when they mentioned fines, mitigation orders, and mandatory land restoration. The HOA president, who once barked orders, now spoke in nervous fragments. Every signature she'd approved, every excavation request she'd ignored, every complaint she dismissed now existed as proof of negligence. The official notice arrived that evening. Karen's pond had to be dismantled. A full restoration plan would be enforced. Penalties were pending. But that was only the beginning. The inspectors also flagged her luxury home's foundation grading and improper retaining walls, opening the door to deeper investigations she never saw coming. Standing in my orchard, I didn't feel triumph, I felt justice beginning to take shape. Karen had turned my land into a swamp for convenience. Now, the consequences she thought she was immune to were closing in, one legal document at a time. Karen's once pristine lawn now looked precarious. Inspectors returned, marking areas of erosion, unstable soil, and mismanaged water flow. Every note they made translated directly into her liability. Her neighbors whispered as she paced in heels on her patio, muttering complaints about inspections, fines, and HOA interference. I watched quietly from my orchard, holding a folder thick with photographs, engineering reports, and official notices. Each page told a story of deliberate neglect, arrogance, and the illusion of invincibility. Karen had underestimated my patience, the power of documentation, and the law. She tried pleading with inspectors, citing HOA approval, landscaping aesthetics, and improvements, but regulations don't bend to ego. The officials issued immediate correction orders: the pond had to be drained, the trenches filled, and drainage re-engineered to prevent further property damage. Non-compliance meant escalating fines, legal action, and potential liens on her home. Her face shifted from annoyance to disbelief. The very property she thought untouchable now carried risk: financial, structural, and reputational. I stayed silent, letting the law speak. My orchard remained partially flooded, but I felt a sense of balance beginning to return. That evening, Karen's mood soured further. Her HOA meetings became tense, her authority questioned by neighbors who had witnessed the aftermath. Whispers about her negligence spread, eroding the aura of control she once commanded. Every meeting, every confrontation, only reinforced the lesson: arrogance has limits, and when you trespass on others' lives, consequences follow. By nightfall, I walked through my orchard, mud squelching under my boots, surveying the damage. I wasn't done yet. Karen had been forced to respond, but the situation was far from resolved. My revenge wasn't rooted in anger, it was in meticulous, unstoppable escalation, and it was only beginning. The flood she caused to my orchard was no longer just water. It was leverage. Over the next week, Karen's panic escalated. Contractors arrived to dismantle the drainage pond, filling trenches and redirecting runoff. Her pristine lawn was ripped apart, heavy machinery tearing through carefully sculpted landscaping. The once glamorous facade of her luxury home now looked chaotic, scattered with construction equipment, muddy tire tracks, and orange safety cones. I documented everything, photographing the process from multiple angles, recording timestamps, and compiling evidence of the disruption she had caused. My orchard, though partially recovering, stood as a testament to persistence and strategy. Karen's sense of control was slipping, replaced by stress and helplessness. Neighbors stopped by, curious about the noise and the disruption. Some whispered sympathy, others quietly recorded videos of the chaotic scene. Karen's reputation, once untouchable in the HOA, now faced scrutiny. Her every attempt to justify her actions crumbled under the weight of evidence. The city inspectors returned, noting compliance but flagging minor discrepancies and warning that repeat offenses would trigger even harsher penalties. Karen's designer sunglasses no longer concealed her worry. Her smug arrogance had vanished, replaced by constant calculations about fines, compliance, and the potential impact on her property value. I didn't gloat. I didn't need to. The law, documentation, and strategy had done what emotion alone never could. They had forced consequences to unfold naturally. Karen's luxury home, once a symbol of status and power, now bore the marks of her actions. Every repaired trench, every displaced sod, every bulldozed floor bead was a reminder that privilege cannot override accountability. That night, as I walked through my orchard, I felt a sense of vindication. Not vengeance fueled by anger, but a measured triumph rooted in planning, patience, and strategy. Karen had created a nightmare for my orchard. Now, the nightmare she ignored would touch her own home. And it was far from over. By midweek, Karen's property looked like a war zone. Excavators, dump trucks, and crews of landscapers moved constantly, undoing the chaos she had unleashed on my orchard. The sound of engines, clanging tools, and displaced soil echoed through the neighborhood, a harsh contrast to the previously silent elegance of her estate. I walked the edges of my orchard, documenting every moment. The pond she had created was gone, replaced by muddy trenches and exposed soil, evidence of both her arrogance and the restoration process. Each photograph, each video, each timestamp added weight to the story I was building, one of accountability she couldn't escape. Neighbors watched from behind hedges and fences, whispering about the dramatic turn of events. Karen's status as a commanding HOA figure had been undermined. No longer the untouchable, she now navigated scrutiny, embarrassment, and disruption. Each step she took was a reminder that privilege does not guarantee immunity. The inspectors returned to evaluate compliance. Minor errors were noted, fines were calculated, and her future projects faced stricter oversight. Karen's confident posture faltered, her usual smirk had vanished, replaced by visible frustration. She had believed her wealth and position could protect her. They couldn't. While she scrambled to respond, I realized something vital: revenge, when carefully planned and legally grounded, doesn't require confrontation. It unfolds naturally, layer by layer, as consequences accumulate. Karen's estate was now a tangible reflection of the storm she had triggered. Her actions had consequences, and they were unstoppable. By evening, the crews left, leaving the property in a controlled state of chaos. Karen wandered through her yard, checking progress, issuing frantic instructions, visibly stressed. The entire street could see it. Her dream estate temporarily turned into a nightmare, all because she had thought my orchard was expendable. I stood at the edge of my orchard, taking one last photo for the day, mud squelching under my boots. Every image captured her folly, every note recorded her accountability. My orchard might have suffered, but the balance had shifted. Karen had created a nightmare for me, but she would now live inside her own. And that nightmare had only just begun to take root. The following morning, Karen attempted to salvage her composure. She walked the yard with a clipboard, barking instructions to landscapers while trying to appear in control. But every uneven patch of dirt, every displaced sod, every muddy trench reminded her of the mess she had caused. Her luxury home, once immaculate, now resembled a construction site in chaos. I observed quietly from my orchard, phone in hand, documenting her frantic attempts to contain the situation. Her expensive equipment and elite contractors moved faster, but the stress on her face was unmistakable. She had underestimated the consequences of her arrogance, and now the entire process of restoration was a visible, ongoing testament to her miscalculation. Neighbors lingered at their fences, watching the drama unfold. Whispered commentary circulated: the HOA queen who once acted untouchable was now reduced to frantic corrections and defensive explanations. Every misstep she took was recorded in my folder of evidence, and every onlooker saw her carefully curated image crumble. Inspectors made a surprise visit mid-afternoon, checking drainage lines and water flow. Karen tried to smooth over their questions, citing prior approvals and technicalities, but the documentation she had ignored now left her cornered. The inspectors noted inconsistencies, emphasizing the need for ongoing oversight. Fines were threatened if compliance wasn't maintained. Her confidence faltered with every word. By late afternoon, the construction crew paused for lunch, leaving exposed soil and half-filled trenches across her property. Karen moved from one spot to another, visibly stressed, issuing orders and checking measurements repeatedly. The chaos was tangible, a stark contrast to the image of precision and luxury she had once projected. Standing at the edge of my orchard, I took in the full scene. My trees were slowly recovering, mud drying in the sun, evidence of restoration and resilience. Across the street, Karen's estate reflected the consequences of neglect and arrogance, unfolding in real time for all to see. This wasn't about revenge in anger. It was about strategy, patience, and the undeniable result of one person underestimating another's resolve. Karen had turned my orchard into a pond. Now, she would experience the chaos and stress she had created, reflected in her own luxury estate. By the next morning, Karen's frustration reached new heights. She was constantly pacing, clipboard in hand, giving urgent instructions to landscapers while inspectors made surprise visits to ensure compliance. Every misaligned trench or displaced patch of soil became a point of panic. Her luxury home no longer felt like a sanctuary, it had transformed into a high-maintenance nightmare she couldn't escape. I continued documenting every moment. The juxtaposition was striking: my orchard, once submerged, now slowly recovering under careful attention, while her estate swirled with chaos, mistakes, and stress. Each photograph, each note, and each video clip was a testament to cause and effect, her actions directly leading to her current predicament. Neighbors began openly commenting, sharing updates, and recording the scene. Karen's aura of authority had crumbled, her position in the HOA was now quietly questioned. No longer was she the untouchable figure who could act with impunity. Every step she took was measured against the evidence I had meticulously collected. Even the contractors seemed unsettled. They were executing orders rapidly, yet the visible signs of chaos, muddy patches, half-filled trenches, exposed pipes remained constant. Karen's attempts to maintain composure were increasingly futile, replaced by a visible, ongoing panic. By mid-afternoon, city inspectors returned once again, reviewing drainage lines and soil stability. Karen tried to explain, citing previous approvals, HOA regulations, and supposed technical necessities, but every claim was contradicted by the documentation in my dossier. Her authority was undermined, her credibility in the neighborhood questioned. As I stood at the edge of my orchard, I reflected on the situation. My revenge was not fueled by anger but by strategy, persistence, and careful planning. Karen had created a nightmare for my orchard. Now, she was experiencing the consequences firsthand. Her luxury estate, a symbol of wealth and control, had become a daily reminder of arrogance's cost. By evening, the sun cast long shadows across both properties. My orchard glistened with drying mud, resilience, and recovery, while Karen's estate remained a chaotic tableau of her misjudgments. The lesson was clear, visual, and undeniable: actions have consequences, and entitlement never escapes accountability. Weeks passed, and the chaos at Karen's estate slowly settled, but the impact remained. Her luxury home bore the scars of hurried restoration: uneven lawns, muddy patches, and the constant oversight of inspectors ensuring compliance. Every corner reflected the consequences of her actions, a living reminder of the storm she had unleashed on my orchard. My orchard, meanwhile, began to heal. Trees regained strength, blossoms returned, and the soil gradually dried. What had once been devastation transformed into resilience, a testament to patience, persistence, and careful strategy. I didn't gloat: my satisfaction came from the balance restored, the principle upheld, and the undeniable message that arrogance has limits. Karen's behavior changed subtly but permanently. Her once commanding presence in the HOA diminished, replaced by cautious interactions, measured statements, and hesitant participation. She had learned, through consequence rather than lecture, that entitlement cannot override rules, property rights, or common decency. Her neighbors noticed, and whispers of respect for accountability spread through the community. I often walked my orchard in the evenings, reflecting on the lessons learned. Revenge had not been chaos, destruction, or public shaming. It had been strategy, planning, and letting consequences unfold naturally. Karen's luxury estate had become a mirror, showing her the disruption she caused, while my orchard emerged stronger, a symbol of resilience and foresight. The story became a quiet legend in the neighborhood, a reminder that even the wealthiest and most powerful must answer for their actions. Karen would never forget the drainage pond, the disruption, or the meticulous consequences that followed. The orchard and her estate had become intertwined in a lesson that required no dramatic confrontation, just patience, preparation, and undeniable evidence. In the end, the water receded, the soil settled, and life returned to my orchard. Karen's estate was repaired but forever altered, a visual testament to cause and effect. Pride, arrogance, and entitlement had collided with careful planning, strategy, and accountability, and the outcome was unmistakable. Standing among my trees, watching sunlight glint through leaves, I felt a sense of closure. Not from vengeance, not from anger, but from knowing that patience, persistence, and principle had won. My orchard had survived, and Karen had learned a lesson she would carry for the rest of her life.